So welcome everybody. Good morning. My name is Matt Lacey. I'm the director of UMVIM for the Southeast jurisdiction. Welcome to a short workshop. We'll be interviewing Dr. David Scott, Reverend Carol Lakota Eastin about their views on mission theology. We hope this is a helpful resource for you and a conversation starter for you and your congregation or your mission team to talk a little bit more about mission theology. And we hope this workshop will give you some good perspective and some good things to talk about. So welcome everybody that's watching. So I will call on Carol first, if you want to introduce yourself to everybody.
Hello, thank you for being here. And for those of you who watch the recorded version, thank you so much for finding this. I'm a United Methodist elder in the Illinois Great Rivers Conference and recently retired from district superintendency. But one of the things I'm doing in my retirement is I am the chairperson of the North Central Jurisdiction Volunteer and Mission coordinating team. Woohoo! Hi, Tammy. So I'll put in a plug for all of us working to train volunteers to respond to disasters and immediate concerns that rise up in our areas, but also to go to new places, meet new people. So my background is I have been a local church pastor. I was a 10-10-10 missionary for the General Board of Global Mission Ministries and assigned as a national missionary to the United States, and have worked with Native peoples for a lot of years, including planting a new church start in an urban Native context in Illinois. So I'm excited to talk about this word mission today.
Thanks, Carol. David, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Sure, and it's an honor to be here with everybody, and especially with you, Carol. Yeah. So my name is David Scott. I'm the Director of Mission Theology for the General Board of Global Ministries. And I usually say that in that role, I do research, writing, and training related to mission theology and mission history. I trained studying mission history at Boston University, studying with Dr. Dana Robert there. And it's I'm honored to be here with everyone.
Thanks, David. Before we start just a plug about UMVIM. So I would be remiss if I didn't remind everybody that UMVIM is the official short-term mission volunteer agency of the United Methodist Church. And this workshop here is a collaboration between all the UMVIM jurisdictional offices. And we hope you will take the time to check out the website, umvim.org, and to reach out to your jurisdictional coordinator or your UMVIM annual conference coordinator if you have any questions about UMVIM or about mission resources. So thanks everybody for joining us this morning. So Carol, I'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about your first mission experience or mission journey experience.
Okay. Well, I've thought about that. When I think of first mission experience, I reflect back to when I was a very small child growing up in the inner city, living in a federal housing project. And my mother was a part of an organization called Child Evangelism. And she put together a Bible school that was held in the offices of the housing project. And all of these unchurched kids would come to this summer Bible school that I, of course, also attended. Or I think of going with her to volunteer at Commonplace, where kids were being tutored and helped to learn to read after school in our neighborhood. But my first mission trip was at the age of 14 through the United Methodist Church I attended. A group of 20 of us youth with adults went to McCurdy schools in Espanola, New Mexico to serve. I was awed by the beauty of the land. We attached to our work time, we called it trip, of course. Attached to that was a visit to Santa Fe, to Taos, to explore the culture of the peoples in that whole Western area. But while at McCurdy schools, I I met the director and a couple of staff people, but all of the kids were away because it's a boarding school and they were all away for the summer. And I never met an Indian student while there. So I was assigned to sanding desks where kids had engraved things into these wooden desks. And my job for a week was to sand away the things they had engraved.
Interesting. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks, Carol. David, how about you?
So my very first experience is probably not as dramatic as Carol's because it involves committee work. I was an engaged kid growing up in my local Methodist church. And so maybe when I was a junior in high school, I was asked if I wanted to be part of the missions committee at church, and I agreed because I was an engaged kid at church. And at that point, the missions committee mostly decided how to disperse money to local organizations in a way that I think a lot of churches would be familiar with. And so, I went to those meetings and it was fine. And, probably 9 months later, the next summer, I did my first mission journey, which was a youth group Habitat for Humanity trip. But probably the most formative experience with mission was actually something that I myself did not directly participate in. As I was sort of graduating from high school, my home church formed a relationship with the Sister Parish organization, which partners churches in North America and churches in Latin America. And so there was a lot of excitement and talk at my church that I heard, even though, I was around the time I graduated and then into college, of this model of mission as partnership. And while I was in college, I met a friend whose home United Methodist Church was very involved in Mission Together partnerships with Lithuania. And so these two experiences of knowing churches that were really deeply formed and engaged and shaped by this mission as partnership model was actually probably the most formative early experience with mission. Sorry, committee work.
Thanks, David. So kind of to piggyback on that, David, a little bit, and I know this is such a large question, and we could talk on and on about this, but how, David, how do you define mission? How when you think about that word, what comes to mind for you?
So I've had to think about this, and I'm going to do a quick plug. So I wrote this book, Crossing Boundaries, which is sort of designed to help congregations think through mission and think through their engagement in mission. So the sort of long definition is: mission is cultivating relationships across boundaries for the sake of fostering conversations in word and deed about God's good news. And so mission involves, crossing boundaries, interacting with people who are different from you, but but in a relational context. Ideally, it's not just this sort of transactional thing, but about building larger relationships, and those relationships ideally then enable conversations, two-way conversations about the nature of God and God's goodness, and how various people have experienced God's goodness.
Thanks, David. Carol, turning to you, when you think about the word mission, and I know your own personal journey probably lends you with a unique perspective about the word mission. When you think about that word mission, what comes to mind for you?
First of all, I think there's so much confusion just about what the word means to the everyday person in the pew. So having served as a local pastor in majority culture, white and Black churches, serving as a superintendent in my conference, one of the questions that you might ask a committee when going into a church is, what's your mission statement? I don't know how many times people would be like, what? It'd say your mission statement. I quit asking that, but they would say, oh, we fill shoe boxes, at Christmas time, or we go every year on a trip to the Appalachians, and they start telling you about the voluntary mission work they do or the things they support, because that word used in the corporate world, now widely used in the church to mean purpose statement. Our mission is our purpose, but a lot of the folks in the pews don't hear it that way. To them, it's still about going and giving goods or helping fix things, and that's sort of mission. The word, I did some looking, the word mission is nowhere in the Bible. It's not in the Bible. And I looked up what its Latin root is. David, you probably know about this, but it was originally a word used in the Roman military to release people from service. So we're sending you away from the military, whether that was honorable or dishonorable. So there's a sending quality to it. And the word of missio, or sending Christian people, sending human beings to share the gospel of Jesus Christ, first appears in Northern Europe when the Catholic Church is sending people to communities to convert Protestants back to Catholicism. So at its very earliest stage, I see David nodding, it's about converting you to my way of thinking. That's what it was about. And then then next it was used by the Jesuits as they came to the new land that we now call the Americas, and the newly discovered world, to bring Christianity to the savages. And it's tightly connected with the entire colonial movement across the globe. So for me, the word mission is intrinsically linked to conversion and westernizing and Western colonialization. I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I think it's thank you both for that. Yeah, I think in the church today, there is, we throw around so many terms, evangelism, mission, outreach, and sometimes those things are quite conflated with one another. And then you add on top of that, kind of, Carol, you're talking about kind of the corporate speak, right, of mission, purpose, and kind of all that gets commingled together to create this really strange amalgam of ideas and misunderstandings. David, when we talk about the language of mission, or even the use of the word mission can be a loaded term for some folks. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of language and how we talk about mission in our churches?
Yeah, and I think it goes beyond sort of individual words to how we sort of frame the stories that we tell ourselves about mission, which are often sort of hero stories, right? Where we are the heroes who go out and help those poor people elsewhere. Like that's generally how that story of mission is framed. But that really creates a power imbalance between the people that are telling that story and others. And that power imbalance, I think, is really dangerous, both in terms of sort of the consequences it has for people's lives and well-being, and also for our theological understandings. I think it's dangerous to put ourselves at the center of a story that is ultimately not about ourselves, but about God.
Carol, I know you touched on a little bit about the language regarding mission. What are your thoughts on that? How we talk about mission, why that language that we use is important?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I just had something happen to me recently, and I think it's why I'm here today. It led to this invitation as we were gathered as the VIM committee for North Central jurisdiction. Oh, we had did some solid ministry, but mostly planning our trainings, etc. And somewhere in that context, I said something about I once went on a mission trip and told a story. And someone gently reminded me, well, thank you, Carol, for telling us about that experience, but we want to remember that we no longer use the word trip, and we use the word journey. And there was a pause. I said, well, thank you for that. But I want to say to you that as much as you are offended by my use of the word trip, I am offended by your worse use of the word mission. And there was a little scuttling going on in the room, and it was lunch break, and we came back from lunch, and then everyone's like, we have to talk about that. Let's talk about that. And people responded well. They kind of quickly got it because of the quality of people they are and their knowledge. But that word mission is so tied up with colonization. And I told you earlier when I introduced myself to give you my United Methodist introduction, I was commissioned as a missionary for a few years, and went with some trepidation to the training to be a missionary that GBGM at the time offered, and was greatly relieved and pleased at the theology, theories, and message I was given. It was not what I expected, and it was good. Yes, David, it was really good.
I'm relieved to hear that. Even I wasn't involved, but I was
It's
relieved.
not about go and convert people, go and change people. It was go and build relationships. Build relationships in that community. Stay. And, once you've developed trust and respect, you may earn the privilege to share your story about Jesus Christ. That may happen. But it was more what I knew to be the only way that we could possibly do build relationships in indigenous communities that have been colonized, whether that's here in the United States or anywhere. Remember when Columbus discovered America, we're about to have that holiday, Columbus Day, which we're going to band together next year and work on getting rid of. When Columbus discovered the Americas, my friend Raggy, who's a Cherokee storyteller, says Columbus without a compass. He was found by the indigenous people who rescued the crew and gave them provisions and food. And in the journals of those who were with Columbus, you can read about the incredible hospitality and generosity of the native people who received them. They were awed by that, and they freely share everything they have with us. And then they go on to say, they are well-built people. They are strong. I can see that I could easily subdue 50 of them, and they could be my slaves. When Columbus returned to Spain that year, and then in 1493, there was this papal bull, Doctrine of Discovery. And the words that came there from the Christian leadership of the world at that time was that it would be very pleasing to increase and spread Christianity, that the health of souls be cared for, and that barbarous nations be overthrown and brought to faith. So discovered peoples became subject to conquest and enslavement. Now, if indeed they will convert and become Christians, if they will submit to the Christian monarchs, the kings, the queens, and the lords, and convert to our faith, then that is good for them. But if they won't, then they must be subdued and they must be enslaved. And the indigenous people were warned, if you do not honor this way, there will be a war. There will be a great war. And that was the beginning of what happened in the Americas. And what followed that was the manifest destiny, the concept of manifest destiny, which appears in the 1800s, which is Christians are destined by God, by divine privilege, to have this new land. America is Cana. In fact, how many states do we live in which, and there is some place called the New Canaan or Cana? This is the land in which you're destined to go. Move westward, young folks, move westward. I live very near that great arch, the tallest monument in the United States is the Arch in St. Louis. It stands for westward expansion, which basically to me means broken treaties. At one time, our people were told you can have all the land on the west of the Mississippi, so they were removed and put in Kansas, put in Oklahoma, and then soon they're having people do land rushes in Oklahoma and taking the land that was just given to the Indians. It's this story of submissive thing. I can't even think of a word for that. Having people submit, oppressing people, and telling untruths. So you've got the removals of people from their land. You have the reservation system developed. You have the wars, the Indian wars over the land. And then the wars became very, very costly. One great attempt was, if we kill off all the buffalo, the Plains Indians won't have anything to eat. So millions of buffalo were killed, got down to 93 buffaloes left on the continent. And those who couldn't be in the militia were told, hey guys, join the train. We'll give you food, come out, and you'll hand you a gun. And for every buffalo you kill, you can figure you've killed 4 Indians. And they gathered up all those buffalo skulls and they made bone china out of it, much of which you can still find in antique shops. Bone china is a part of that memory, that history. And the wars got expensive, and they said so maybe we could do something else with our money. Let's turn some of these forts into schools. And the boarding school era began from the 1870s to the 1970s. Native children in this country and in Canada and in Australia were routinely removed from their families and placed in schools away from them so that they could become Christians and assimilate. And the comity agreements were made in which Christian denominations partnered with the United States government as to which denominations had which territories. And the goal was to annihilate through military or assimilate through the schools, with the message, kill the Indian and save the man. So
Yeah,
all
and
of
it's
them
quite
caught up in the word mission for me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a heavy history. And, you know, shifting over to today, when we look today at our local churches, you know, Carol, as you said, they may use the language of mission trip rather than journey. Some may be aware of the heavy history of the damage that has been done by the church. Some may try their best to whitewash it away, or just kind of put it in a closet and lock it away. And that was in the past. Let's not talk about that. Let's not, you know, think about that. Let's move on. And David, I'll pivot to you now. When you're interacting with a local church and talking about mission, in your view, are there helpful ways to talk about the mistakes the church has made in mission with folks in our local churches? And when you talk about mistakes, how do you do that without kind of offending or pushing away, or I guess what is a helpful way to talk about mission now while acknowledging the heavy history and all the mistakes, but at the same time trying to get folks in a local church to a place where they understand mission as partnership, as you said?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to be honest about that history. I don't think it pays to gloss over that history. And sometimes that does create pushback. I mean, especially with the ways in which race is politicized in this country. There's, that's not always a message that's well received. I mean, I think you can hold some tension in sort of indicating that missionaries had a range of practices, and it was possible for missionaries to have both at times bad practices and at least mixed intentions. I mean, mission is everything Carol said is absolutely true. And so I'm not disputing any of that, but I mean, mission's also complicated. I mean, there's mission across multiple denominations in multiple places over 5 centuries, even within the sort of Western imperial era of mission. And so there are, lots of examples of mission being entwined with colonialism, and I actually was talking with the Council of Bishops about this last month. All of the ways in which the church has been deeply entwined with colonialism, and at the same time, people that some of the same people who were sort of deeply motivated by their faith. I mean, this is one of the challenges of history, is that we're rarely presented with people that are entirely heroes or entirely villains. And I think when we learn to see people in their humanity, people on both sides of that story, right? Or all sides of that story, multiple sides of that story, people who were missionaries and colonizers, and people who were colonized and resisted mission, or colonized and collaborated with mission. If we can see them all as humans, as humans made in the image of God and beloved by God, then I think that increases our compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Carol, and you had mentioned your experiences at DS and trying to have some of those conversations with churches in your district. How did you talk about the mistakes and try to have those conversations to bring folks along?
Yeah. One of the most important things, and just this last week, we were with the Native American course of study, where we are preparing pastors for Native contexts in the North Central jurisdiction. And one of the things we stress is people are not responsible for things that happened a long time ago. And in learning, well, let me say, they oughtn't feel guilty. This is the thing I keep working. They oughtn't feel guilty. They may bear some responsibility because of the privilege and the opportunity in the land and things they have, some responsibility, but they oughtn't feel guilty. And when we had the act of repentance, Dr. Tinker, who spoke before the general conference, said, I'm going to apologize to you because you've been lied to, and I'm going to tell you some things you may not know. The reality is that most of the people in the churches in my district don't know this history. Most Americans are unaware of these things. And so when they begin to learn it through wonderful studies like the United Women of Faith have offered in the past, the great book by Tom Whitewell Fassett and others, that the studies that have, when they learn it, there's this shock moment, and then there's this guilt. And I want to work so hard with people to say, let's redirect that feeling, because that's not appropriate. So one of the things I did in my district was every year until the pandemic hit was to try to have a mission opportunity, a journey to a Native American site, and bring together people from several churches to have that experience, but to prepare them by several months ahead by let's all read Tom's book. And also developed a devotional where every day they read a piece of the history of the area we were going to, and had prayers and preparation. And we would meet physically or by Zoom, so that we're building a team and at the same time learning about where we're going, so that we're not going in with just this just totally detached. I really appreciate what David is talking about, relationship. If we could rename these somehow, this word partner is a great word. Relationship is a great word, because that's what I saw really happening. Yet people, even with all that preparation, people still get some things wrong. We're not perfect, but the attitudes are so deeply, so whoever is leading really needs to be equipped to look for and watch for the implicit racism and biases that go on with a team, and in the evenings to debrief things that happened. I know one trip down to Oklahoma, I asked one of the Cherokee elders to come and spend an evening and talk with a group, because there was an attitude moving through the group, and I wanted them to understand better the area they were in. People bring preconceived notions of what they're going to see, what they want to see, what they want to get out of this experience. And there needs to be a shifting of that to be ready to be incredibly flexible, to not presume to know what it's going to be like when they get to the new place, and to not worry about what they're getting out of it. That's what a trip is for. I think that's why that word is it's kind of like a vacation. And, that's not a trip. This isn't a trip. This is an experience to a new culture, a new land that is unfamiliar, and you're just going to have to be ready to receive what it is.
I really like what you're saying, Carol, about this notion of being ready and being open, this sort of openness, because I think and not that mission journey should be all about our experience either, because I mean, there's a way to frame mission journeys that is still sort of self-centered in your own spiritual growth. But I think when we are open, that's when God is able to surprise us.
Oh yeah.
When we're open, God shows up, and God does things that we wouldn't have expected.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is what God does.
Yeah, and that is something that resonates with me. Just thinking about my first mission experience, now reflecting back, I see how arrogant I was. I see how presumptuous I was about the people I was going to serve with. And David, to your point, you don't want it to make it all about you, but my first experience, one of my primary motivations was I feel God calling me to minister to these people. And 2-3 days in, I realized that was completely shattered, and really the journey was not about remaking this culture I was visiting. It was really about helping to remake my own faith and realizing all the mistakes I had made, and that to a degree God was already there. God really didn't need me to be there, but at the same time, God still took that arrogance and those mistakes I was making and turned them into something that was productive. And it just changed my life in a way where I wouldn't be a minister today. But how, and as we said before, so much of this history is tied into colonialism, politics these days. I mean, everything is politicized. And Carol, you touched on this a little bit. Is there any hope that folks in churches today can heal some of the damage that has been done in the past? I know it's quite a big question and quite a big, a presumptuous question, but Carol, I mean, what steps can people take in local churches to heal that damage, or at least, I mean, is talking about it and acknowledging it the same as working to heal that damage?
Well, learning about it and talking about it is a first step, Matt, but I think it goes back to what David was talking about in terms of relationship. Yes, of course, there is hope for healing. We are the people of the resurrection. We are disciples of Jesus, and we know what God can do, and that the healing hand of Jesus does heal. But when I think about Jesus' ministry and how he went about the healing, it was all about being with people where they are and building these relationships. Just eating together, sitting together, talking together, staying in people's homes, that being with. So wherever you are in your local church setting, you ought be looking around you and saying, who are the people in my neighborhood? And are there Indigenous people or other people who have come from other parts of the world and live here now that I'm unfamiliar with? How can I connect to my neighbors that I might otherwise call other, and find ways to work side by side on projects? I like that idea of partnering, stepping into community with, not always hosting everything, but showing up to what they're doing and saying, can I help? I want to say Dr. Jean Green, who's a Bible professor at Wheaton College, is a personal friend of mine, and he's a United Methodist New Testament scholar who, after hearing the history, thought, I've got to do something. And so he and his wife went to a powwow at the Chicago Indian Center and just were there and wondered how people would welcome them. And they were amazed at the welcoming conversations and how they became volunteers regularly in the community with what they are doing. And then moved on to become a really important teacher and writer on Indigenous theology and thought. And Gene really stresses, he called me just the same week you guys asked me to do this. He called me and talked to me, and he says, I don't know why, but I'm sending you this article I wrote called The Death of Mission, that was published back in 2012. He wrote it for a journal. And I was like, oh my God, your timing is fantastic. The Lord is awesome that way sometimes. And the network of the church is so great. But in that, he concludes that the language we need is this language of welcome. And although the word mission is not in the Bible, the word welcome is all through it so many times and places. And creating the welcoming hospitality atmosphere, but also going to where people are, is how we begin to heal. And if there is a Native community still in your area, connect there. One of the things we did in Illinois, in central Illinois, was we had events where we built relationships with the Indigenous people who used to live here and were removed. So went to Oklahoma to the Peorias and the Miamis and got to know them and start attending their functions, because it's the land of their ancestors on which we live, and built long-lasting relationships there. Yes, there's healing that can happen. But you got to step outside of your four walls of your church.
Yeah. David, what about you? How can we talk about healing?
Just a big amen to everything that Carol said. But as people of the resurrection, we believe that God can bring good things out of even the worst of situations when humans have behaved at the worst. That God's redemption can still operate in those, and what God does to heal and to reconcile us is to bring us into relationship with God and with each other. And to be in relationship, you need to show up. You need to show up on other people's ground and get to know them where they are, and to reciprocate that hospitality back and forth, and show up for other people. Yeah,
we had a couple of so I did have some folks who sent questions in before this. Two that I do want to share with you, and the first one is quite a big one. But one question I got was, we are so wrapped up in denominational politics and a potential split, and talking about politics in the church. And I know the answer, but I would like to hear both of your comments on it. Is mission still important for Wesleyans? It seems that this person who sent me this email, seems that we're focused so much on the book of discipline. Does mission matter anymore. And I'd love to hear whoever would like to chime in.
I mean, I think there is something, and I hear Carol's concerns with the term mission, and I think there's a debate to be had about whether that term can be salvaged or whether we need to find new language. But I think this this practice of being engaged outside the fellowship of the immediate fellowship of the church is deeply Wesleyan and something that we cannot give up. And I think you see that in the long history of Methodist mission, with even with it all of its failure. I think you see that in the notion of social holiness and social reform, that I mean, if we're going to be fully Methodist, we need to be convinced that God calls us not to just to some sort of personal or pietistic fellowship with each other, but that God calls us to be engaged in the world and to be working to bring about God's shalom in the world.
Carol, you have any thoughts about why mission is so important?
Oh, it's the main thing. It's the main thing. And with the trouble I have with the word set aside, I've spent 30 years thinking, how can I redeem this word? And maybe we can, and maybe we just need a new word, but since it's not even in the Bible, maybe we need to think about that. But it's the main thing is and think of the early church and of Paul's journeys and Peter, and go back and take a look at how the good news was spread and people cared for. It's the Great Commission. But remember, the Creator is the creator of all people. And the Spirit of God has been made known to all people. That's Wesleyan also in terms of prevenient grace. The Holy Spirit is already in and present in the life of every human being, in and through being made in the image of God. It's there already. And I would argue the presence of God is in every plant and every animal and every part of creation that give glory to our Maker through their very being and life. And so there's this rich cosmic connection of all being related to one another. And in the book of Revelation, it says that people of every language, hear that? They're still speaking their own language. People of every language are going to come together and give praise to our Creator and to Jesus Christ, who is the incarnation of our living God. So it must continue. It's the building the relationships until we can all gather and our voices can join and praise the one and only.
Great, thank you. I'll do one more. Oh, go ahead, David.
If I can, I really appreciate you bringing up plants and animals too. I was having a conversation just yesterday with someone about sort of definitions of mission, and mission as about the redemption of all of God's creation,
Yes.
which extends beyond the human. And so
yes.
if we really take that notion that God loves all of God's creation and wants to care for all of God's creation, then we really need to see care for creation as part of our mission too.
Definitely. If you don't have a green Bible, get a green Bible and read about it in there. But for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. What is the world? Is it humans? Humans are only a part of the world. So I like to translate that God so loved the cosmos. There you go.
I like that. Thanks. I'll do one more question that was sent to me, and then Rhonda, I don't know if anybody who is with us has any questions before we close, but so I'll ask this last one, and we can go to closing remarks and wrap up. But a friend of mine who's an associate pastor at a large church sent me this question. He said, it seems that the primary activity in any church today is usually worship or worship service. What are some ways that folks in local churches, clergy, and laity can help churches shift the focus from an hour every Sunday to mission and reaching out to our communities in the world. I know it's a big question. Any thoughts about how to? Well, I realize that we're talking about a complete culture change here, but what are some ways that we can draw attention to mission and make it a focus rather than or in conjunction with the primary activity, which is usually a worship service every week?
It's odd how far away, how that seems to be the norm now when you consider our Wesleyan roots, that the Wesleyan movement was so much to attempt to get away from just that, but to form small groups and to be in the world, acts of mercy, practices of piety to lead to the grace of God in your life. But the acts of mercy is such a critical part of the social ministry of the Wesleyan movement. And so it's not that long ago that we were doing that well. So we have that. But one thing I've heard of is just gather everybody at church on Sunday and tell them to wear their work clothes, and instead of staying in the sanctuary, you go out to jobs in the town. Give them a taste for that feeling of what it is to get your hands dirty. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, and I think when we live out our faith aright, that there's a connection between worship, mission, and discipleship, and the three sort of all work in conjunction with each other as part of this broader life of faith. Ideally, worship should be equipping and encouraging us to go out into worship, and then celebrating how we have encountered God as we have been out in mission. So I think there's a way to connect worship and mission as well.
Yes, great. Well, thank you both for taking the time to be here. It's been a great conversation, and I hope this conversation will be used by a lot more folks to start their own conversations about mission. Again, just a reminder, we hope you'll check out the resources at umvim.org. UMVIM is here to help connect folks in the local church to projects around the world and to offer resources along that journey. So we hope you'll check out our website, umvim.org, and use the resources there. David, do you want to plug your book one more time, and maybe Global, and Carol asks you after David goes?
Sure. So the book is Crossing Boundaries, Sharing God's Good News Through Mission. It's a 6-session study guide for local churches thinking about their engagement in mission. It's published by the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry and available at online stores near you. And you can also find additional thoughts from me and other folks about mission and global Methodism at umglobal.org, umglobal.org.
Great. Carol? Oh, someone asked, so the book by Tom Whitewolf Fassett is Giving Our Hearts Away. And I'm a part of the Native American International Caucus. Our website, naicumc.com, has resources and information. We try to keep you updated on current Indian issues, and 2 big topics right now are missing and murdered Indigenous women and the boarding school healing project. So you can find information there, and some really great lists and program ideas and patterns and worship ideas to help lead your congregation into more awareness about those contemporary issues.
Well, thank you both for your time. It's been a great conversation and great to hear from both of you. And so thank you for being here.